My name is Kara Feeney, and I'm the Director of Exhibitions here at the Evanston Art Center. Again, we're so excited to have you all with us here today. We're here in the gallery. We have two artists behind us, Nancy Rosen and Mary Porterfield, and then the rest. We couldn't get quite everyone in the shot, but we're excited to hear from them and learn more about their work today. So a few reminders, please stay on mute while the artists are speaking. You can find mute at the bottom of the screen. It should be on the left side of the screen and it says mute. If you have any questions for the artists, we are saving questions for the end of the program. You should use the chat function that you can also find on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen as well. Because we're hearing from multiple artists today, just try and be specific with who you would like to ask the question to. If it's someone specific, otherwise you can ask general questions as well. Just another note, we are recording this, so if you get kicked off or have to leave early, we will be posting it onto our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to hear anything you miss as well. And now I would like to introduce to you Paula Danoff, our President and CEO, who will then briefly introduce the artists.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are so excited to have these amazing artists in our gallery space. It really is a beautiful show, and hopefully you'll have time to stop by. We're open 7 days a week. We have a little COVID protocol, but it should make very simple for you to come and see the show. It really is. It's a spectacular show. I'd like to introduce the artists briefly, and they will also give you more information about themselves when they're talking. Jenny Gao is a full-time artist, creative director, and entrepreneur residing in Madison, Wisconsin. Jenny specializes in social practice and impact projects using mediums such as murals, public art, printmaking, and storytelling. Charity Henderson is a figurative artist residing in Queens, New York City. Charity's work explores various psychological states through mixed media paintings of the human face. Mary Porterfield currently resides in Chicago, Illinois. Mary's life-size images, which are cut out and mounted to the wall, are inspired by her mother's struggle to care for her father, who has Parkinsonism. Nancy Rosen currently resides in Evanston, Illinois. Nancy's work has been exhibited across the country, and most notably in the new, well, it's not so new, but the Netflix hit Grace and Frankie. You can watch for her pictures that work in the movie, in the TV show. And Katrina Kachenko is an artist born in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and currently resides in Chicago, Illinois. Katerina's work celebrates the beauty of the universe in all of its manifestations. So it's a wide range of very different artists, but yet they all are showing a show in a figurative way. So I would like to have Jenny start off with her art talk right now. Thank you so much.
And let me just share my screen really quick, 1 moment.
Okay, great. Yeah, so first, thank you so much for having me as a part of this show and for all of you for coming to this talk today. So I'll start off by sharing a little bit of context for my work. My work often centers on intimate points of disagreement and junctures where people either divide or connect. And I think a common misperception in the society we live in is that enemies and strangers are faraway people who grow up in environments totally foreign from ours, when in actuality, some of the most painful divisions that we reckon with are the ones that are closest to us. And so it's people who grow up in the same family and household and form entirely different belief systems. It's next door neighbors watching the same news stories and coming to opposite conclusions about what happened. It's the daily traumas that we inflict upon familiar people. And the invalidation of who we are in our most intimate and private spaces is one of the most excruciating things for us to navigate. And so I explored these relationships in my work as the path to affirmation and reclamation of who we are. Can you go ahead and click over to the first image? Yeah, cool. And so just a little bit about myself. I grew up in very polarized spaces. I'm the daughter of immigrants. My mom came from Taiwan and my dad came from China with roots in Shanxi in southern Mongolia. And we lived in semi-rural Kansas. And so between the division in my parents' heritage and us being an Asian American family in a predominantly white conservative part of Kansas, I'm very used to being in polarized spaces with lots of different viewpoints. And this pushed me from an early age to figure out my own way of thinking and to ask questions. And because if people's views are so different, then surely what that means is there are other possibilities in what we see directly before us. And so I'll tell you a little bit about two recurring images in my work, the homing pigeon and the tree-headed woman. And so I grew up raising homing pigeons and other animals with my dad, and we had a habit of taking in animals that were discarded by other people. And both of my parents suffered from unhealed intergenerational trauma and abuse, and raising animals was a rare space of healing for us. And so we provided care and nurture to these animals that we couldn't give to one another. We probably took in hundreds of homing pigeons over the course of my childhood. And we had two lofts of pigeons, one for the old retired racing pigeons that we got from other people and one for their offspring. And a little bit about homing pigeons, they imprint on a site. And so we couldn't let the older birds fly free or else they would return to their original homes, even though their shelters would be gone. And it always sat heavily with me as the daughter of immigrants, what it meant for the older birds to stay caged while we let their offspring fly free. And so the homing pigeon continues to be an animal that provides me with healing and a sense of direction. You'll see this motif come up in works like this piece right here. And so this artwork called The Substance of Your Beauty, we see the body of the pigeon integrating with the hand and indicating the direction of the piece and where the woman in the piece is looking. We see interrupted pieces of a figure and a face, but where each part of the body seems to end, they also find connection and completion through something else. And so we don't have to know where all of the pieces of us come from in order to be complete. We also don't need to rely solely on what we started with. We can make new pieces of ourselves, make new connections, and therefore new possibilities. And so go ahead and click to the next slide. So here's a detail of that same artwork. And of the face and of the hand and the pigeon. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So this artwork is called The Light Within Us, We Do Not Use. And I'll introduce the tree-headed woman who is a recurring figure in my work. Her name is Fern, and that's because F, E, R, and N are the letters that you need to remove from Jennifer to spell my name, Jenny. And there's a story about the spelling of my name that I'll share on another occasion, but much of my art practice is about both what we visually see and what is invisible to us, and also what needs to be removed to reveal what's most important. And so trees grow infinitely until the day they die, and we know this even if we cannot perceive it. With Fern, we see her tree head, but we cannot see her roots. And just because you cannot see something, again, doesn't mean that it doesn't still have its influence. And as a descendant of diaspora, thousands of miles away from my family's roots, this understanding of these invisible influences is crucial to me and my sense of connection. There's a concept that I regularly practice in my work, which is to complete whatever challenge and test is before me. And so for me, I'm the first person in my family to break a cycle of intergenerational trauma and abuse that started with Western imperialism in Asian countries. And so the impact of that on my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and then ultimately my parents and who they became as a result when they came to the United States and the things that they weren't able to overcome even after they left China and Taiwan for a better life in the States. And so my dad used to tell me when I was a kid that I ruined good things. And sure enough, anytime I accomplished something as a kid, something bad immediately followed. And it wasn't until I was a bit older that I realized that he was the one who was sabotaging each of the things that I did. And it was a repeated pattern in the family of his parents sabotaging his accomplishments and then him in turn doing it to me. So I share this anecdote because I think that this is something that that a lot of people can relate to in terms of the generational gaps that we feel and what people perceive as being a good thing to do for say their kids, for the next generation, that actually isn't a good thing, and that's actually interrupting them from the path that they actually need to be on. And so for me to break that cycle and to start a new one, I needed to learn not to perpetuate self-sabotage and self-doubt in myself and my own work, and to instead replace it with patterns that could uplift myself and others. And so with this particular piece, I'm referring to this light within us that we do not use, that can either illuminate who we are or can destroy us from the inside. And so again, it's this idea of completing the test and to ask ourselves regularly, what is the test that we need to complete? And when we feel that hesitation before a big decision, before a pursuit, before our ambitions, before our dreams, before our fears, to ask ourselves, what will it take for us to complete this test? And how do we make it easier for the person who comes after us? So next slide, please. This artwork is called We Write Our Autobiographies on the Shoulders of Giants. And for my parents, ultimately, their limitations and what they were able to do and also not able to do when they came to the United States became the things that destroyed them from the inside, and the limitations of this country, and they still hurt my mom to this day. But what I always want to stress when I share stories like these of the impact of diaspora on my family is that for all of our collective struggles, we're also individuals. And my family is much more than the abuses and the traumas that we struggled to overcome. In spite of colonization, in spite of Western imperialism, in spite of the resulting rise of authoritarianism in countries like China, in spite of the barriers that face people of color in the United States, my family did it. They made a life here. And it is always a thing of wonder to me how many generations it takes for someone like me to do what I'm doing. I couldn't have done this if I were in my parents' shoes or in my grandparents' shoes. And ultimately, what I believe all of this collective effort is for across generations is so that people like me can achieve self-actualization in a society that supports and believes in them. So let's go to the next slide. This is important to me, particularly as an AAPI artist, because a white dominant society tends not to recognize people of color as individuals. And any one of our faults is perceived as the collective's faults. And so with this artwork, with these three pieces that I've shown today, and my larger body of work around them, I seek to define what it takes to claim one's identity. And so mind you, this is not racial pride work. This is not Asian identity artwork. And frankly, I have a resentment for arts institutions that only show artists of color when we are making racial identity work, but not showing our work when we make art about any other topic, like let's say nature or the environment or social issues. And so rather, this work is a perspective on how our psychology operates, on how our relationships develop, and how our societies grow over generations. And this is a perspective on how we become individuals in relation to one another. This is a perspective on nature and the environment. This is a perspective on topics that we typically only allow white artists to make art about in the Americas, and as a result, only know a Western perspective of. And so in this case, all of this storytelling is happening through the lens of an AAPI woman. And so I'll end with these thoughts. At the start of this talk, I shared that my work centers on the junctures where we either divide or connect, and that I seek to reveal that which is invisible to us. And so perspectives like mine are largely missing from contemporary art today. And so a lot of this is to ask the questions, what does the world look like to someone like me, to somebody else? How will we know how these perspectives can transform our identities and our ideas of how the world works? How will knowing all of this allow more of us to live substantial lives? And how will knowing this allow us to create our own autobiographies that stand the test of time? So, thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please use the chat function and we will get to them at the end of the talk. Now we will hear from Charity.
Hey everyone, my name is Charity Henderson. I'm happy to be joining from Queens in New York City. I've been a New York City-based figurative artist for about actually more than 7 years now. I was born in Western New York and got my BFA at SUNY Brockport in 2010. And then I got my MFA from UMass Dartmouth in Massachusetts in 2013. And I majored in painting both times and moved to New York City right after grad school, which is where I've been since. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. I've always been drawn to faces as an artist, even from my earliest scribbles as a kid. I was always most captivated by faces. I think I'm interested in how a person's stories and experiences can be read in their face, and especially in their eyes. And in a lot of my work, you'll see that the gaze and kind of that interaction is kind of a dominant theme in my work. We can go on to the next slide. So I work on translucent drafting films, such as Mylar, Denryl, or Duralar. Duralar is the one I work on the most. All of these films are kind of similar to vellum, but they're sturdier. So they're translucent, which means that something that's behind the work or something that is drawn on the back side of the drafting film will show through to the front. And Duralar accepts both drawing and painting materials on both sides. So you have quite a bit of versatility there. And it's kind of unusual to have a material that you can draw on and then you can apply oil paint directly to without any other kind of priming. Let's see, I think we can go on to the close-up images. Oh, there's one more, that's right. So with these works, you can see how some areas are a little bit grayer, like in the two works on either end, like the hair sections look a little grayer. And that's because I start by drawing on the back side of the sheet. So those areas are actually the drawing showing through to the front of the work. So I usually start with a fairly detailed graphite drawing on that back side. And then I flip the work over and I work with oil paint on the front. And I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. So this is a close-up, and here you can see how on the left side of the face where the paint is thinner, you're actually seeing a lot of the structure is seeing that drawing through to the front. And then on the right side of the face where the paint is more opaque, of course, you're just seeing like the top layer, the paint. And when I flipped the work over and I'm painting, I then go over sections with mat board squares to blur and scrape the paint. And this is something that I picked up from printmaking, actually. When you do a BFA, you kind of have to, take a class or two in all the different areas. So printmaking is, something that I did alongside painting. And when you ink up a plate, you'll use, like cardboard or mat board, little sections. So I took that same technique and I started applying it to painting. And since Duralar and other drafting films are very, very smooth, it works very well to scrape, very, very fresh paint around on the surface. And I do have to do this within about 24 hours of having put the paint down, because it has to be very fresh, or it doesn't really work too well. Let's see, and we can look at the next slide. This is another close-up, and here again you can see, you can see part of the face. You're kind of seeing the drawing behind the painting showing through in the areas where the paint has been scraped away, and then you're seeing, of course, areas with much thicker paint where you don't get that effect. And I do go back in, like after that kind of initial 24-hour period when I have to do all of the blurring and scraping that I'm going to do, I will let the work dry, and then I'll go back into some areas like the eye with this painting, the eye to the right side of the screen. And really, kind of develop that to much greater detail if I want to. And sometimes I will even flip the work back over after the paint has fully dried and add a little bit more in to the drawing on the other side. And these works can actually be viewed from either side, and occasionally I have displayed them from their quote unquote back side, which is kind of interesting. So this process that I've developed it's kind of a way of building up the face and then deconstructing it and then building it back. And I've always thought it kind of has interesting parallels to thinking about identity and personalities, like what is underneath when you kind of scrape away, and how many layers are there, and what's the surface layer. So this is a process I've developed over probably about 8 years of working with Duralar, because I was first introduced to it in grad school, and it's just become a very interesting process for me to think about, identity and experience, and how we carry our experiences with us, and kind of have a layered development or layered accrual of who we are, that ultimately shows through in our faces. So I think that's all I have for tonight, and I think we'll take questions at the end of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Charity. That's a good segue into Mary. Let me just find her here, who works in very similar material.
I just wanted to thank all of you for coming. I'm Mary Porterfield. I actually received my master's in occupational therapy in 1993, and I worked for a while as an occupational therapist before going to art school at Arizona State, where I got my MFA in 2002. And I now work part-time teaching painting at Northeastern in Chicago, but I also continue to work part-time as an occupational therapist in both an inpatient hospital-based facility and an outpatient facility. And for many years, my work in healthcare really inspired my work. A lot of my work had been about my patients and my interactions with their caregivers. But I have to say, in really thinking about this talk and what I was going to say, I think that my training to be an occupational therapist had a big influence, because when I was in school, and this was at Washington University in St. Louis, we had to take a year of anatomy classes where we had to dissect the cadaver. And at that young age, I became fascinated by musculature and what happens when a certain area is injured and how that impacts movement and the ability to do functional tasks. So with that, Kara, if you could go on to the next slide. I really believe that background doing figurative work is a real impetus by my drive and wanting to be a figurative artist. But this is a departure from what I've done previously, because it does depict my mother's role as a caregiver to my father, who has Parkinsonianism. And I did this work based on photographs I had taken of my dad in Christmas of 2019, just before the pandemic hit. And I had no idea when I took the photographs that that would be the last time I'd ever see him walk independently. As the pandemic unfolded, my mom, of course, was his primary caregiver, and he had a bad fall in the summer of 2020. And since that fall, he can no longer walk independently. He now needs the help of 2 people to walk, and he needs the full assistance from my mom to stand from a low surface chair or the commode. And I'd call my mom frequently during the pandemic. And of course, I couldn't go home because at the time I wasn't vaccinated. They weren't. They're in Nebraska. I'm here. She really couldn't have a lot of people in her home because my dad has so many health factors. So it was hard talking to her and hearing her stories and hear how she was going so much of this alone. And so when I remember calling her one day and just asking her how she's managing to help my father with toileting, because he's now incontinent of bowel and bladder, and he needs so much help to stand, much more than this installation depicts. And she'd say to me, well, Mary, when he has to use the commode, I put my whole body into it. I hold him with my neck and my shoulders and my arm, and I lean into him. And when I have him supported, I use my other arm to wipe him. And she's like, and I get it done. And I remember hearing these stories and being really afraid for her safety and my dad's safety. It just seemed so scary to me that she as a 79-year-old woman was bearing the weight, literally and metaphorically, of a 140-pound man. And so I wanted this installation to be a tribute for that and the many caregivers that are out there. And I used the trays because in my dad's world, when my mom serves him breakfast, lunch, and dinner on a tray, that is honestly the highlight of his day. And to me, the trays were symbolic of what gave him some joy, but also were symbolic of my mother's routine. And I wanted to create the trays with an element of ambiguity, because me looking at the situation, I didn't know how long this was sustainable. And I wanted to create a tray where there might be a sense that it's made of glass and you wouldn't know how long it could support his weight. Or on the other hand, could this be something she can continue to bear? So the trays represented my own questioning, looking at this with a lot of concern. And of course, the water was symbolic of how I saw the situation. When I called my mom, early on in the pandemic, she was just so happy and cheerful. And she's like, Mary, it'll be okay. I'll pray, things will get better. And then of course, it just got so difficult. So the water really represented her submersion in this stress. And I really wanted to show that. And then in terms of the transparencies, like Charity, I also work on semi-transparent Duralar. And my reason in doing so was that by creating these semi-transparent layers, they became a way of depicting the gradual disappearance of my father. He, as you might surmise, Parkinsonianism doesn't just affect the body, but it affects the mind. And I saw him, even through my phone calls from here, I could see the change in his ability to comprehend, to converse, to remember. And so those ghost-like elements. And on the far right, you see it where I would do a layer on transparent Duralar. They represented that fading of what I saw literally in his cognition. So that was my impetus for the Duralar film, and Charity described its quality so beautifully. And now, Kira, if you could go on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about my process. And please excuse these were taken from my iPhone. I take a lot of photos in process. And what I do is I draw with fine charcoal on the Duralar film, and I work out the proportions, and then I paint both additively and subtractively to render the figure. So the lights are made by avoiding any placement of paint on the film, or if I'm trying to get those in-between tones or mid-tones, I'll wipe the painting away. And then if I want to create the darknesses or shadows, I'll gradually add the paint. And then Kira, if you can go on to the next slide. This image is to my right now. I like a lot of artists, I don't have the wall space to create the work I want to make. So my solution was to make these fake walls out of paper. And once I have the image created on semi-transparent Duralar, I'll cut it out, and then I'll take it over here to my fake wall, and I'll use museum putty, and I'll play around with the arrangement, and I'll take, you know, many photos on my iPhone, and I'll look at that compositional construction and decide what I like the most, and that's what I'll go with. And you see the woman on the far right, which is at the installation of the Evanston Art Center. In this image, she's facing the left, but I decided that wouldn't work compositionally, and Charity had talked sometimes about working on the back side. I did the same thing. It wasn't working for me, so I flip-flopped her in the installation, and now she's facing towards the right, and I added another ghost-like figure just behind her to represent that continual motion of my mother as she engages in this daily routine. And Kara, if you can go on to the next slide. This again is just an image in process. Again, the image of my father was based on photographs I took over Christmas when I was home in 2019. And I really get enamored by folds. As I mentioned earlier, I love anatomy. And to me, when I draw folds and the nuances of the wrinkles, they're a way to represent the anatomy that lies underneath. And I also find it fascinating as someone ages or has a degenerative illness, how it affects the garments of clothing, where you see moments where this clothing sags and other points where it crinkles because of tension. And I really enjoy methodically showing that. To me, it's representing the anatomical structures that underlie that. And Kara, if you can go on to the next slide. So this again is another image in process. So to be honest, I ran out of room for the foot. And so I told my students this, but I took another piece of Duralar and I took transparent tape and taped it on. And then in this particular image, I knew that I wanted an image of my mother holding my father. So in this particular case, I put a sheet of the transparent Duralar over the underlying completed image, and then I drew on top of that so I could get the proportions correct. And then Kira, if you can go on to the next slide. This is further along in the process, and I wanted the tray to be in the correct proportion for holding up my dad's recliner chair, so I had to put paper behind that to help myself with the perspective. Redrew my mother again, and then rendered it to the point that it is in the exhibition. And I should clarify, when I say my mother, the images of the female are actually myself posed as my mom. When I went home over Christmas, and then I was again home for their birthdays in February of 2020, I asked my mom to take, you know, gosh, tons and tons of photographs of me posed as her. I put her wig on, I held the tray, I got down on the floor. And my reason in doing that was because my mom spent so much of her day caring for my dad, and she's under such physical strain. I didn't want to add to that. I wanted my visit with her to be stress-free, and then she still got to be a part of the artwork. So with that, I will close, and I just want to thank the Evanston Arts Center again for showing this work, which is just so important to me. And I'll happily sign off and turn it over to, I believe, Nancy. And I'm happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. And now we're going on to Nancy Rosen.
Hi there, everybody. So I've pretty much been in Chicago, Evanston, Skokie my whole life. I've been in my studio now for 20 plus years, and I thought that I would just tell you how I came to doing this body of work, because most of my work is done from live models, and this was not. Kara, you can like just put a slide up and move it whenever you want. So I've been in my studio, I had been in my studio for about 16 years, and very happy, it's a storefront. I'm on California in Chicago, and I had my blinds down in my studio. I couldn't see in, and I couldn't see out, and nobody could see in, so I thought. And I was very, very happy that way. And then I have 3 sons, and my middle son was living on California in Humboldt Park, and he was being very interactive with the community. And he's like, Mom, you know, you really need to open up your windows. And I'm like, no, I don't want to open my windows. And he's like, Ma, open your frickin' windows. He said, I'll help you. I will clean them for you. So I'm like, all right, I did it. So, so I'm in my studio now, like a fish in a fishbowl, and I'll be talking on the phone, and I'm standing around, and I look out the window, and all of a sudden I see all of these young men walking by. These, I will call them black hatters, or the Chabad boys. And so I see them walking around, and I'm like fascinated by them. They're at the bus stop on Fridays, and I'm looking at them, and they all look the same, but they're all completely different. And I'm like, whew, I'd like to draw these kids. So I bought the paper. I got big pieces of paper. I gessoed it, and I'm like all ready to go. And so one day I see one of these kids outside my window, and I go running outside, and I'm like, hi, I'm the artist from across the street. And he looks at me, and he shakes his head, and he goes, I know. And I'm like, huh. And then I'm standing there talking to him. I'm telling him I really want to draw them. And a friend of mine who knows what I'm up to and is way more Jewish than I am comes running across the street to sing my laurels and all that. And so this young man says to me, well, I'll have to talk to my rabbi, his principal, whoever it is. And I'm like, okay. And so I go to shake his hand and say thank you, and my friend screams at me, and she's like, you can't touch him. And so this young man very kindly takes out a box of Nature Valley granola bars, puts the box out, and we shake hands like this. So, okay. So the days go on, the weeks go on, and I see him again out there, and I go running out, and I'm like, so hi. I'm like, have you talked to your rabbi? And he's looking at me, he's with a friend, and he is now so uncomfortable, and he's telling me, you don't understand. We are ultra, ultra Orthodox. And I said to him, well, can I talk to your rabbi? And he says, yes. And him and his friends could not get away from me fast enough. So then I see this rabbi walking down the street, and he's got his big hat on, and he's got a big coat on and big beard, and he doesn't look up, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, oh no, I'm sure he is a very lovely man, but there is no way that I'm talking to that man. And so then time goes on, and I start talking to people that are way more Jewish than I am, and everybody's looking at me like, Nancy, there's no way you're never going to get to draw these kids. They're not going to come in your studio. They're not going to sit for you. They're not. So I'm like, I did some wrestling paintings instead because I was into the black and white thing, and my youngest kid is a wrestler. So anyways, one day I was teaching a class in my studio, and I had a model on the table in the middle of the studio, and the door opens, and this young man opens the door. He was in the slide beforehand. His name is Yehuda. He opens the door and he says, "Hey, is anybody in here Jewish?" And I was in the third grade. Nobody else in the class that day was Jewish. Yehuda's in the middle. And so I raise my hand and I'm like, me, I am a Jew, pick me. And so I go running up to him, and he wants to give me Shabbos candles, because what this sect of Jews do, it's the Chabad, they want me to be more Jewish. They want somebody who's half Jewish or Jewish to become more Jewish. So they go out and do the community on Fridays to try and get people to be more Jewish. So for me, he's going to give me Shabbos candles. So I take the Shabbos candles and I say, I would really love to draw you kids. And he's like, okay, yeah. And he's got a little cross eye, he's got a little bit of a lisp, he's adorable. And the next thing I know, there's like 15 of these kids in front of my studio. And so I'm talking to him and I'm like, I would really love to draw you kids. And most of them are shaking their heads okay, but there's this one kid and he's like, And I'm like, because I was thinking I would draw them from life. And I go, how about I'll take pictures of you? And he's like going, I go, my husband will take pictures of you. And so sure enough, okay. And then we made a date and they were gonna come on Monday. And so I had everything ready. And there's a thing that these guys do to men when they do their outreach, and it's called tefillin. I think it's called laying tefillin, and it's a box, and it's a beautiful box, and it's got very special prayers in it. And they put it on your head with these long straps, and then they put it somewhere here. It's very specific. I don't know exactly what it means. And then they wrap you and they they say prayers. And so I tell my husband that we're gonna be doing this, that this is finally happening. And by the way, you have to get wrapped in tefillin. And so Monday comes, and sure enough, we say they're gonna come at 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, they show up like clockwork. And Yehuda, I've told him many times he should just go ahead and be a mayor. He organized everybody and would get everybody to come in. And so the kid on the top right, so he's in the first batch of kids, and he comes in and my husband's there ready to take pictures. And this kid says to my husband, oh, no, first we've got to wrap you in tefillin. And my husband's like, no, first we are getting the pictures. And then, like only Jews can do, they did a little negotiating and we got the pictures taken. And then let the games begin. I started doing the paintings, and so the first one that I did was Yehuda. And so I put him, he was in the when you walk in the door, you could see it from outside, and there's this big painting of him, and he was like, wow, so when do I get my painting? And I'm like, oh, I never thought of that. So I ended up at the end of doing all this, I had prints made, and I gave each one of these young men a print. But anyways, as this whole thing went on, we built this great community, and the kids started coming in, and they would Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and there's a ram's horn, and it's a very special sacred thing. And they would come in and they would ask me if they could blow the shofar in my studio. And of course, and I got to ask them all of the questions that I would ever want to ask anybody. And these group of young men, this school for them is their high school, and they come from around the world. And so they are, it's like a boarding school basically. And they live, the school is down the street from my studio. And then in the community, it's just West Rogers Park. It's just a residential community. And so they live in dormitories around. And so they would come in and they would, the holiday Sukkot, they would come in and do the prayers for that, for Purim. And we became really good friends, and they ended up they loved their paintings. And oh, so here's a photograph. At one point, I ended up doing 35 of them. I could still be doing them today. I stopped the project like I think a couple years ago. They would still come to my door and knock on the door and say, "Would you paint me?" And I would ask them when they would come to the studio. I would ask them where they came from, how many children were in their families, and none of them came from a family of less than 4 children. And like there was this one kid, I don't see a photo of him, but he came in and he was like very precocious, and he says to me, he's like, so he let me know that he knew where to get the kosher sushi and the Starbucks, and he wanted to know if the Lincolnwood Town Center over here had, you know, nice clothing. And I looked at him and I'm like, what do you care about the clothes? And he looked at me like I had 4 heads and said to me, what? All we have to do is wear black and white. And I'm like, huh, all I wear is black and I have a whole closet full of it. And so then I started looking even closer at them, and I would see them, you know, their suits. Sometimes they fit beautifully, and a lot of times they were either too big or too small because they were wearing their younger brothers or their older suits, or they were blue because they had been washed so much. And it's just been a really, really wonderful experience working with these kids. And they were like the happiest kids I've ever met. They'd come in and I'd go, how you doing? They'd be like, thanks God, they're good, happy. And so it was a wonderful experience, and I am delighted to have them at the Evanston Art Center. I've been looking at them at my studio for years in my, you know, painted up, colorful studio. So it's nice to see them on the walls at the Evanston Art Center. So that's what I got.
Thank you so much, Nancy. We're so excited to have them here as well.
Thanks.
Okay, so Katerina is next.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you for having me. One moment. Okay. It's happened with me now that I'm not in my studio, but for me, always my inspiration was nature. So, and I'm lucky now it's spring. I found some blossom trees and it's just perfect for me. And I'm an artist from Ukraine. I've been living in Chicago for 4.5 years. It just happened with me. I didn't plan, but I met my husband in a network. After it, he came to me. We stayed in Ukraine for 1 year, and after it, we came here. And so I've been here. And I'm a professional artist. I've been an artist probably all my life, and I had my master's degree in Ukraine in Academy of Design and Art in Kharkov. And it's about probably my introduction. And if it's possible, can you move to some slide with my pictures? Thank you so much. And all of these works I did already in Chicago. And when I came here, okay, let's be honest, it was a stress for me because everything new, everything not like I used to. But I understand that whenever you are a human being and you're surrounded by another human being. And all of us, we are soul, we are body, and we have our understanding of this world around us. And always most important part of this world for me, it was nature. And I can say I had my nature in Ukraine, and I have this beautiful nature in US. And I feel through the nature, I feel love of this universe to me. I feel like I'm part of this planet, and I'm part of this world, and I'm lucky to have my life. I like to have this love of this universe to me. So when I come here, again, I've been lucky to find my studio here, Art Space. And I thought, okay, what can I do here? Because last projects, what I did in Ukraine, it was more cultural stuff, more Ukrainian. And so I just decided to do something about this connection, human being and nature, human being and this universe. And for me, you can show your emotion through your face, of course. And everybody probably like first way how we judge person, we judge by face, probably. And now this last year, people covered their faces, and it's like, okay, and what next? What is it inside? And so for me, body, it always was something like we covered our body, but our body is part of this nature, part of this world. And I try to show some condition like some summer, spring. And in this picture, in the center, it's work. I could call it spring. Right part, it's a summer, and left side, it's a day, it's man. And for me, it's like some natural moments through your body. Like spring, it's time for blossom. It's time to renew something. Time, at least for me, time to find something new for my life. Time again find this belief that everything is fine. Life is going on. After cold winter, everything renew. And I don't know. I'm anytime worried about my age. The time pass by, but anyway, I understand this Earth. It's endless. It's give the spring every year, and every year we can have hope because Earth is alive, universe is alive. And so through our body, we could be alive through this connection from this universe, we're part of it. And for me, it's always like, it's my joy, it's my love. And so all this project, it's about this body connection to the world, to the universe. And can you go for the next slide, please? Thank you. And yeah, two of those probably even more look like it. And left part, it's one of which I call blossom anatomy. And for me, it's the theory that our anatomy, if you can see on it, like I heard about anatomy classes in previous speaker, and for me, anatomy is really beautiful. We are beautiful inside and out, and it's not just beauty of our makeup; it's just beautiful creation. We created beautifully. And so for me, this blossom anatomy, it's about how beautiful we are. We many times can just see flowers and be amazed how beautiful flowers around us. But the same for me about anatomy, about human being. We are created perfect. And for me, all of it about this. And so on the right, it's more again about this condition, about this connection of human body and nature. Next slide, please. Again, one more from the connection with the universe. And the red color, for me, interesting how color could work also. And of course, it's red color of fire, color of love, color of passion. and we can be part of it too, and we can be part of it through our body. And I just tried through this body paintings express this inner feeling about some station. And I don't want to even give some very clear explanation what in my painting. For me, more important that everybody who could see it could find something, his connection. If it's not touch, okay, it means it's not connect. If you see it and you find your own connection, your own explanation, what is going on with this painting, it's mean I'm succeeded with this painting. And also for me, of course, very important that painting not struggling with an accent, not struggling with different language, painting is universal language. Thank you. Can you give me a next slide? Thank you. And yeah, it's again one more from Blossom Anatomy. And there is two paintings, man and woman. A woman on the poster of this. Probably I should say that it would be better if they would be together, but okay, I didn't say it. I don't know, it's my mistake, sorry. But whatever, it just, again, it's about the connection and about inner connection and this inner feelings through our body, what, like, how you can express it through your painting. Thank you. Is it something next? I try to be fast because time is almost over. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody can have really a hopeful spring, because for me, spring is always a hopeful time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're, let me see. We have any questions here? We do, I think we have time for just one question. And then unfortunately we're running out of time here. So this question is for Nancy. Someone would like to know how you got involved with Grace and Frankie.
A friend of mine that I grew up with here in Chicago, Skokie actually, she is an executive producer on the show, and she and her family have been collecting my work since I'm a little girl. And when it was time for them to figure out what Frankie's artwork was going to look like, you know, everybody threw their friend and their mother and brother's work in, and they picked mine. And so I've been doing that for the last 7 years now.
Well, thank you, Nancy. I think that's the only question we can get to tonight. We just want to say thank you so much to the artists and to everyone who is joining us here today. The show is really beautiful. There's a lot more than what's just shown behind me. The exhibition will be up until May 23rd. In our hours, we are open 7 days a week. We would love to have you here visit us. Just make sure to wear your face mask. And we also have a temperature check at the front door as well. And we'll also be, again, uploading this video and trying to upload as many images as possible if you're unable to visit here in person. But we just want to thank the artists and everyone here. And I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. Thanks. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.